Tonight, the moon looks especially lonely.
Sophie looked up and spoke in the center of the stage. She had a small microphone attached to the dress near her neck, so her clear voice spread to every corner of the auditorium. From her voice, Jacob could tell that she was a little nervous.
This lady looks beautiful from behind.
The boy, who was playing Romeo, walked toward Sophie while murmuring to himself. The other students on the stage danced around them. As the play went on, Jacob was amazed at how Sophie had memorized all the lines and was delivering them almost seamlessly. When the conversation on the balcony ended, the curtains closed slowly, signaling the intermission. The students talked about Sophie's beautiful dress while they went out to the bathrooms or to buy drinks. Jacob checked his watch and realized that 1 hour had passed. He had been so immersed in Sophie's performance that he didn't even know a whole hour had passed. He carefully listened to all her lines, observed all of her facial expressions, and noticed all of her changes in tone.
With only 1 week of rehearsals, they're doing great.
Kathy stood up and said as she took a deep breath.
Well, yeah,
Ms. Blue agreed reluctantly. She only meant to give Sophie a challenge by making her play Juliet, and had not expected that Sophie could give such an excellent performance.
Since you know Sophie, why don't you guys go see her backstage?
Ms. Blue glanced at Jacob and Kathy and suggested.
Oh, I think I'll stay here,
Kathy said, before turning to Jacob.
I can show you the way if you want to meet Sophie.
Jacob thought about it and accepted the offer, as he wanted to meet Sophie. Kathy knew her way around and easily took him backstage. Behind the curtains, some students were arranging the set for the next scene. Jacob and Kathy walked around them and went into the dressing room in the back, where a young female teacher was freshening up Sophie's makeup.
I'll go back to keep Ms. Blue company,
Kathy said, before hurrying away. Sophie saw Jacob in the mirror, and she was pleased. She frowned a little when she saw Kathy rushing out, but decided to ignore it.
You are doing great!
Jacob walked up behind her and praised her. The teacher, who was touching up Sophie's makeup, got done and silently left the room to what looked like a cute couple to her.
Yeah? I'm not making a complete fool out of myself, right?
She asked nervously.
Are you kidding? I didn't know that you could act so well. Especially once you got over your nerves. You look just like Juliet out there,
Jacob praised. He was telling the truth. Sophie looked amazing on the stage. Sophie blushed at his compliments and said,
Thanks. I'm glad you're here.
It was a big deal for her to admit it, as she generally wasn't one to talk about her emotions out loud.
I'm glad I'm here too. Where are your parents? Did they come?
Jacob asked then. At that moment, another teacher walked into the dressing room. As she clapped her hands, she called out,
The second half is about to begin. Hurry up and get ready. My parents are here. They're sitting in the second row and have saved you a seat.
Sophie stood up and walked toward the door. Jacob returned to the seating area and found Helen and Dracon in the middle of the second row. Helen saved a seat beside her for Jacob, so he waved at Kathy in the sixth row to let her know that he was switching to the seat in the second row. Then he squeezed himself over and sat down beside Helen.
You went to see Sophie just now?
Helen turned to Jacob.
Yeah, I went to check on her,
Jacob answered.
Did you come here with Kathy?
Helen asked again.
Yes,
Jacob admitted in awkwardness. Helen kept quiet and turned to the stage. The curtain was pulled aside again as a brand new scene appeared in front of everyone. Romeo was begging for help from the priest in front of a church. Then, Sophie was led into the church in her elegant dress. Helen sat up straight as she watched attentively. She was appreciating her daughter's performance. It was Sophie's first time being on stage, demonstrating her talent. Helen's love for her daughter could always be seen in the way she looked at her and doted on her despite her packed schedule. Sophie moved around like a doll on the stage, and her heavenly charm was amplified 100 times in the spotlight. The way she recited her lines was a little stiff, but she didn't stutter. The show went on smoothly. In fact, all the students were focusing on Sophie's charm instead of her performance. Only people like Helen, who were highly educated in arts, paid attention to Sophie's performance details. Helen caught all the highlights and the shortcomings, too. The play was coming to an end.
A grave? Oh no, a lantern slaughtered youth. For here lies Juliet, and her beauty makes this vault a feasting presence full of light.
Romeo's most famous monologue put an end to the classic play.
Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again.
Romeo picked up the poison and drank it all. Sophie slowly woke up and was stupefied as she saw Romeo laying on the floor.
Her acting is pretty good here, as she demonstrated how astonished Juliet was,
Helen commented lightly. Jacob, however, knew what had actually happened here. Sophie forgot her lines. Sure enough, after a few seconds, Sophie decided to omit the long lines in the end and went straight to take Romeo's sword. The straightforward suicide was to all the teachers' surprise. At the same time, Juliet's death brought the entire tragic play to an end. The curtains closed as the play finished. There was a big round of applause in the hall. All the actors and actresses came to the front of the stage and bowed in their costumes. The principal, who sat in the front row, asked the official from the Education Bureau nervously,
"What did you think of it?"
This principal felt like the ending of the play was its biggest issue because there was a long speech during the rehearsal. However, the student who was playing Juliet suddenly took out the classic verses during the play. It was not just a few sentences, so it exposed the lack of preparation of the play and attracted lots of attention. However, the official nodded in satisfaction.
"It was a good play, especially the ending where she committed suicide. She displayed the panic and the anxiousness so well. It is rewritten very well."
"Ah." The principal lost his words. He was deeply relieved and said,
Yeah, the teachers are good writers, and the students are good actors."
The official from the Education Bureau continued praising the play and the actors. The principal was thrilled as he accompanied this official out of the hall.
"Oh, send over the recording. We'll show it in the news as a demonstration project and make copies for all the schools for them to learn from."
The official turned back and said to the principal. The principal was extremely excited. He only wished to demonstrate the school's student integrated development plan and never thought the play would be such a success.
"Mom!"
Sophie came directly to the audience in her costume after the play and ran into Helen's arms.
"Hey, darling, you were amazing today."
Helen hugged her back and said proudly.
"Was I good, Dad?"
Sophie immediately turned to Dracon, who looked serious. "It was all right," Dracon said calmly, as he didn't want Sophie to get overly proud. In reality, as a father, he was very proud of his daughter's performance. He thought she wasn't good at a lot of things, but now he realized that she was quick on her feet and smart. She could do well as long as she put her heart into it. Jacob, on the other hand, looked at her with a smile on his face. He was happy about her success in her first performance. Jacob turned back and realized that Kathy and Ms. Blue had already left the hall.
"Come on, let's get out of here."
Sophie held Helen and Jacob with each of her hands and headed to the exit. She was still in her costume. It felt like Juliet from the stage was still alive. Jacob sensed dozens of eyes staring their way. When they got outside, they saw that the parents of the supporting actors and actresses were talking with the teachers. Helen and Dracon also noticed that Ms. Blue and Kathy were standing together outside. Since they rarely came to the school, Helen hurried over to greet Ms. Blue. Sophie was scared of her class advisor, so she dragged Jacob to the other side immediately. Sophie's school appeared to be very quiet when they walked out of the arts hall. The field under the moonlight not far away reminded Jacob of his own high school years.
Hey, was I good or not?
Sophie looked at Jacob when they walked a few meters to a basketball stand. It was very good, Jacob answered.
I actually forgot my lines in the end, so I thought, whatever, I'll just get it over with quickly.
Sophie laughed and hit her head in embarrassment. She was in a really good mood now that the play was finished. Why did you suddenly take part in this play? Jacob asked.
The school voted me out. I didn't really want to be a part of this, but then they kept pestering me, so I agreed.
Sophie rolled her eyes. Oh, did Henry get transferred to another school? Jacob asked her.
Yes. I was so sick of him.
Sophie nodded without further discussion of why Henry got transferred.
Soph!
Helen waved at Sophie from beside Ms. Blue. Sophie knew that Helen wanted to ask her about some things, so she walked over slowly and reluctantly. Even if she was thinking with her feet, she could guess that they wanted to talk about her grades and performance in class. However, judging from Ms. Blue's smile, Jacob could tell that she was in a very good mood. Therefore, she was probably going to talk about how well Sophie had done.
It's kind of late, so we should head back now.
Kathy looked at Jacob for his agreement and said to Ms. Blue and Helen,
Yes, go back as early as possible because the dorm will be closed soon.
Ms. Blue nodded. Helen also nodded toward Kathy.
So it's a deal, Mrs. Helen. I'll come to visit you tomorrow.
Kathy lightly bowed to Helen.
Okay.
Helen smiled in response. Jacob looked at Helen, then at Kathy. He couldn't figure out what kind of agreement they had reached. He then said his goodbyes to Sophie and her parents before leaving with Kathy. Jacob and Kathy got on a bus to their college. On the way, Jacob couldn't help but ask, "What did you and Soph's mom agree on?"
Just something small. She spoke with me privately for a little bit. I'll visit her tomorrow when you go there to tutor Soph,
Kathy answered.